All right, welcome everybody to episode 7 of the Kenny and Renny podcast. Got that right, episode 7. Last week I billed it as episode 5 and totally missed the fact it was episode 6. We're doing this so fast, Kenny, one after another. I'm starting to lose track of everything here.
I forgive you. It's okay. I forgive you. Yeah,
you always
teamwork. That's how we're making the dream work here.
Yeah, well, and it has been a dream so far. This is great. Kenny, how are you doing today?
Excellent Friday, Masters week. Lots of fun hockey to be going through, and coming off another fun post-game show yesterday, and all the excitement leading into Monday's trade deadline. So it's a great time to be covering the sport that we love.
Kenny, I wonder, it being Masters week, being a guy who's hit 2 holes in one round, 3 in a calendar year, did you find yourself getting a lot more critical of the professional golfers after that happened? Like, do you sit back now and be like, what's he doing? I would never do that.
No, I don't at all. One of the problems after you've had that kind of a run is that, again, I'm still not even a single-digit handicap, Sean, but when you now all of a sudden hitting the green used to be a success when it comes to a par 3. Now, if you're not hitting it close, it's disappointing. But I do have to say that in my Masters pool, I have Tommy Fleetwood. So he had an incredible ace yesterday on the 16th hole. So, and as all my friends would tell you, I take just as much joy for watching people get aces than I did of getting my own, which were out of this world.
Well, we've got an ace of a show here today, as we're going to have Emily Kaplan on from ESPN, who we are super excited to talk to. And we also have Cassie Campbell coming up later in the program. Let's
just a quick talk. Sorry, one quick one before we get into Jets. Joey, thanks for joining us. The green is for the Humboldt tribute here. Green Shirt Day. It's Green Shirt Day for me. A couple days late, but wanted to give a little bit of a shout out to there. We know it was a tough week on that front with the anniversary. So this is my tribute shirt today.
You know what I thought was, I was doing a little bit of research on Emily Kaplan, and she had a nice tribute on ESPN for the boys the other day. So that was great of her. She's really connected with hockey. And you know what? One of the things I really enjoy about American journalists when it comes to them covering hockey is how plugged in you'll find sometimes they are with the Canadian hockey scene right down to the junior A level, in all honesty. And I've got a buddy who played in the NCAA for a bit, and he texted me yesterday and was kind of upset that he didn't think that the Canadian media was making enough of a big deal of the NCAA Frozen Four. And, it got me thinking. I do think that potentially American journalists who cover hockey pay more homage to Canadian hockey roots, at the grassroots level, than we do for the American grassroots level. Something to think about, and maybe something we can run by Emily when she gets here. But
one quick one there too. Sorry, Nathan Smith, the Jets draft pick, plays with the University of Minnesota Mankato Mavericks. They got knocked out yesterday in that 5-4 game. A lot of discussion with the Manitoban Ryan Rintoul, who's been following that team very closely and was down in Pittsburgh. He's talked about just how exceptional a season that Nathan Smith has had. He's got that great story. I grew up in Tampa, played roller hockey, just had a really exceptional year down there. I mean, I think it's a little bit early to speculate if he's going to stay in school or come out, but he's one of those kind of under-the-radar prospects that we haven't really talked much about. We know there's not as much forward depth in the organization in terms of NHL-ready players, but Smith's had a great year. And in one of my stories on Paul Stastny going into the season as well, Mike Hastings, the head coach there, was just raving about Nathan Smith's season there. So it'll be interesting to see what happens with him coming up here. He's one of those guys that, whether it's this year or next year, he's one of those really interesting, intriguing forward prospects. A really, really skilled player, and also pass first guy, but really worked on his shot this year. And I think he had a really impressive goal from the slot yesterday in that Frozen Four semi. So that'll be something to watch here in the coming days.
I'll tell you this. I had a conversation with Nathan Smith when he was when we could sit down beside players 2 years ago heading into the season and have conversations with guys. And the whole rollerblade story kind of blew me away. But the other thing that really seemed to stand out for me about him was he just seemed so happy. he told me about doing the rollerblade thing and just getting into hockey, and how happy he was just to be able to do that and make that transition, and then how happy he was to make the transition he had to be within the Jets organization. This seems to be a guy who appreciates every little opportunity that's given to him, and it shows in the way that he takes advantage of those opportunities. And I'll say it, I've said it before, I'll say it again. The Jets are a team that drafts for character, and it shows up time and time and time again in their prospects being really good human beings who take a really interesting and positive approach to hockey. It's refreshing to see, and walking into a room full of guys who feel that way. It's an interesting culture they've built, and I think it's one of the reasons that it's been a successful culture. We're going to bring in Emily fairly soon, but we wanted to just touch quickly on what we saw from the Winnipeg Jets in that last game against the Montreal Canadiens, and what we didn't see specifically in Blake Wheeler not being around. I think, Kenny, both of us had talked about it. It was weird to see a game in which the Winnipeg Jets were playing that Blake Wheeler wasn't in. The examples that we've seen of that, I think 2 since 2015, were both end of season games where the Jets were clearly resting players, and the feeling was kind of that last day of school, where we'll let you skip the last day of school. Totally different feeling this last game, seeing the Jets go out without their heart and soul captain.
Yeah, I mean, it dates back to that first Toronto game, Sean, when Blake left after the first period. I mean, when he took that high stick from Pierre Engvall and then didn't come out for the second. We looked down at the bench. Yeah, I mean, the Jets bench has had, a shortage of skaters on it before, but not seeing Blake kind of in the middle directing traffic and all those sorts of things the way that he often does in terms of those conversations was odd. And I mean, Josh Morrissey said it flat out, Sean. I mean, he said he had not played a game since becoming a Winnipeg Jet where Blake Wheeler had not been playing, because he was also a healthy scratch in that game at the end of the 2017-18 season. So it was odd. And I mean, I think that, the natural things, the cliches are said, other players need to step up. And Paul Maurice certainly talked about that importance of, what a good leader and what a good captain does is help build the leadership group behind him. So this is a chance for those players to step into that role on probably a temporary basis and see how they perform. I mean, we saw it yesterday. The Jets had a sluggish or, poor second period. There's no doubt about that. But they managed. They sorted it through, and then were able to hang on for an important victory for them to start that 5-game road trip. So, Blake Wheeler diagnosed with a concussion, according to Paul Maurice, and we'll see how long that he's out. I mean, we've talked about this before. Provided, again, any head injury is serious, but as long as it's something that doesn't keep him out for, say, the rest of the regular season, I think there could be some benefits. Blake Wheeler's played through pain and through injury this year. He might be a little bit more refreshed for the stretch run and the playoffs. But again, when it comes to head injuries, you just don't know how long those things are gonna run their course. So the most important thing for him is to get healthy and get himself into a position where he's feeling better.
Is this good for the Jets to be put into a situation where they have to sink or swim without the guy who's covered them off when they've been in similar positions, losing star players?
Yeah, I know what you're saying. I mean, I don't think any team wants to be without its captain at any point in time, but trying to learn how to play and maybe not be quite as reliant on some of those leadership fronts. I think, sure, there could be some benefits gained in terms of players maybe spreading their wings a little bit, but I mean, again, we know the Jets are going to miss Blake Wheeler in a multitude of areas, including the power play, where he continues to be one of the most productive players. I believe he's still tied for the lead with Mark Scheifele in terms of power play points, and they just miss the tempo that he sets in terms of driving the pace and all of those things. I mean, we know it hasn't been as productive a 5-on-5 season for Blake Wheeler as we're used to seeing, but that hasn't been from a lack of effort. So I'm sure they'll do their best to manage, and then they'll be happy when Blake Wheeler is back on the ice.
Well, we'll dig a little bit more into the Jets as we go on at the end of the show here, but we've been promising the audience Emily Kaplan from ESPN, and she's here to deliver. Look at that. Even we get you into the show before the 10-minute mark because you're so prompt, and hey, everyone says that you're such a professional, and it's stuff like this that makes us buy into that. How are you doing today, Emily?
I'm doing great. It's so great to see your faces. Sean, the last time I saw you, you were booking it at the hotel gym in Edmonton on the treadmill.
Yeah.
You were crushing that workout. And Ken, I haven't seen you in months, years.
It's
Has it
sad.
been that long?
Last time at the soup box. I'm missing
Oh,
our lunches in Chicago. That's for sure.
yes. Ken has a great soup spot in Chicago. He's teaching Mia all about it.
Emily, it's funny you bring that up because Ken and I have lost, I think it was a combined 70 pounds since about the time that I saw you at that gym there. I'll tell the story again, Ken, because I'll tell the story. I'd gone to the bubble just like you at that same time, and when I had a bad quarantine, like I'd gained a whole bunch of weight, so I had couldn't fit into 2/3 of my suits. So what you saw from me, I remember at the time you were like, "Man, you're working out really hard." In the back of my head, I was like, "Emily, I have to. I got like really fat, and my suits don't fit, so I don't have time to mess around with this." So what you saw was a desperate man taking desperate measures at that time.
Okay. That makes me feel a lot better about my gym shame because I was like in and out of there in 30 minutes.
Emily, one of the things I learned when we were talking with each other on the treadmill was that you're from New Jersey. So this is going to be the most important question you handle in this interview. Being from New Jersey, who do you take, the Boss or Bon Jovi?
Oh, that's a great question, but it's very easy for me. It's the Boss.
And how does it land on that? Like Kenny and I are from the hair metal era, so we are very much, our lives are shaped entirely through high school dances. And I mean, there's probably 17 slow songs that I've had to Bon Jovi songs. Are your parents selling you on the Boss, or were your parents at the age where maybe they got the Bon Jovi appreciation?
I think they appreciated Bon Jovi, but they were definitely Bruce Springsteen people. To that point, my mom was a waitress in Hoboken, New Jersey, and was an extra in one of Bon Jovi's, no, sorry, Bruce Springsteen's music videos. Like, I think you can see her in the very corner. So maybe that's what it is. It's in my genes.
That is
Amazing.
absolutely phenomenal. How does a kid from New Jersey end up being so into hockey that you are the type of journalist in the States who wants to make it covering hockey, which I think I've thought in the past it would be, I'd be worried if I was an American journalist covering sports, feeling like I was going to limit myself because sometimes hockey, being just a sole hockey reporter, can be limiting.
Yeah, and it's interesting you say that because before I covered the NHL, I was covering the NFL for Sports Illustrated. And that you think is the dream job, right? You're covering the most popular sport in America, and you could write about the fourth string tight end and people care. But ESPN brought me in for a football job, and they interviewed me, and they called me back a couple months later, and they said, we don't have any football jobs for you, but you've mentioned a couple times that you're a really big hockey fan. Would you consider doing this? And the reason I'm a hockey fan, it's pretty simple, actually. I'm a middle child of all girls, and I have serious middle child complex, and I thought my dad hated me. And my dad is a huge hockey fan. He played growing up, the club in college. He was a big Rangers fan. And so bonding growing up, we'd watch Rangers games together. And now, obviously, I'm his favorite.
Awesome. One quick one, Emily. I mean, that experience to be part of the Monday morning quarterback launch, what was that like? Sort of, it was kind of groundbreaking at the time, and that sort of shift to the online media.
Yeah, no, it was incredible to be able to work with Peter King because he's so entrenched in the game. He was the editor of that site, knew everybody, but also just thought the game a little more creatively. And when I say the game, I mean football, but also journalism. And it was all about taking readers places that they couldn't go. Like Peter's favorite story he ever did was with Brett Favre, and he did 24 hours in the life of Brett Favre. And he loved saying, and I haven't done a Peter impression in years, but he's like, I was there when he was brushing his teeth at 5:10 a.m. But just get that access is all about relationships. And those are the lessons that I learned from Peter.
Speaking about relationships, I was doing some reading up on you, and I know at one point when you got to ESPN, you had told people there that you wanted to be the Ramona Shelburne of hockey. Give me an idea on how she has shaped your career, not only from striving to become her, but getting to know her and her influencing your career at that stage.
Yeah, well, if anyone doesn't know Ramona Shelburne, she covers the NBA. She lives in Los Angeles, and she's just the coolest. She just rocks at her job. And so, yeah, I told that to my editor. And one of the things he did when I first started was, we should just make investment trips in you. And why don't you fly out to LA for 2 days, and to shadow Ramona and see how she does her job. So I did that I think 3 weeks into my tenure at ESPN. It was so cool. I saw her at the studio in LA. She was doing The Jump or whatever TV show. We then to go get lunch, and just throughout lunch, she's taking calls, and she's just like, oh, sorry, it's the Lakers GM. I just have to take this. And it's just so casual about it, but you can tell that she just puts in all of this work to, again, maintain those relationships, get people to respect her and share information with her. And so, throughout my career at ESPN, I've been able to call her up a couple times and ask, what would you do in this situation? Or how do you feel about this? And it's just, there's a Taylor Swift quote, there's a special place in hell for women who are mean to other women. I've always loved Taylor Swift, but I like that quote, and I think women fit very well into it.
Obviously, too, the game of hockey needs more help when it comes to inclusion, but there is a good group of female reporters, especially on the writing side. I mean, when we were able to go to events, I know you guys had that important, breakfast together. What's it like to see more females taking on some of those roles, even though more steps need to be taken?
You're so right. It's a small group, but it's a really powerful group in the sense that we all have each other's back. And there's a text chain that we have of literally I could count them on a hand, but the beat reporters in the league, whether it's Kristen Anderson in Calgary or Kristen Shilton in Toronto, Sarah McClellan in Minnesota, I could go on. But my closest friend in hockey actually is someone well, Ken, and it's Isabel Kershudian, who used to cover the Capitals, the Washington Post. And I'll remember when I first got the job, it was the Chicago Draft was my first event. She comes up to me and she's like, hi, I'm Isabel. We're going to go get lunch together. And I was like, who is this girl? What's her deal? I was so disarmed by how welcoming she was. And I thought she was jealous of my job or whatever it was. And I felt like such an idiot after, because she literally just wanted to form a relationship, share the information she had and insight she had for the first few years in a job. And to this day, I had an hour-long conversation with her yesterday. She lives in Moscow now. And it's just pretty cool to have those relationships too.
You bring up Isabel and you talked about Ramona and her ability to get people to trust her and open up to her. And I think that's a good example of Isabel doing that with you. I remember her telling me when she was in Washington how she started covering the beat and she really didn't know that much about hockey. And at one point she left a scrum, and Barry Trotz, who everyone knows really well here in Manitoba, he comes from Manitoba, pulled her aside and took her in to show her video and kind of educate her on the kind of things that she needed to be doing and different things she could look for and questions she could be asking. And I wonder, what's that element that you saw in Isabel that she'd be able to get an NHL coach trust her to the degree that he would reach out to her to bring her in and educate her in that way?
That's a great question. And I love that story too. I think it's her transparency. Isabel grew up in South Carolina and obviously was not exposed to hockey in the way that we were. And really the only reason she's covering the Capitals is that she was raised by her grandparents who were Ukrainian, and she spoke Russian growing up. And the editor was like, great, Alex Ovechkin, you're going to go cover him. But I think when she took that job, she was very transparent about who she was and says, I'm just a reporter. I'm learning the game. I don't know what I don't know. And I think if I learned anything about pro-level athletes and really high-level athletes and coaches, they respect that, and they really value that. They don't need to agree why something happened. They just want to know why it happened. So I'm sure Isabel came into that job and didn't act like she was a hockey expert, didn't act like she knew everything, was asking honest questions. And I think that's probably what Barry Trotz recognized. And he wanted to make her feel included and also just help her coverage.
How about for you, Emily? What's your kind of welcome to the dojo moment in terms of story that you've covered on the hockey side? And sorry for it's not meant to be as much of an inside joke as it is, but Emily is someone who spent time at Alex Ovechkin's parents' and childhood home. So, what's your favorite hockey moment on maybe that kind of front in terms of a story that you've covered so far?
That's a great question. There's maybe it's just because we're talking about Isabel and a Russian player, but one of my first feature stories I did at ESPN was on Vladimir Tarasenko. And when I first came to hockey, I had no contacts, and Tarasenko's with Octagon, the agency, and I knew folks from Octagon from football, and I knew their publicist, and I was like, help me out. What players are interesting? And they're like, why don't you write about Vladimir Tarasenko? And I flew out to St. Louis with his marketing agent, and we show up at his house. And I just didn't really know at the time, some of the stereotypes about Russian players. that fans have, that media still has, some of the perceptions, and just listening to him talk about it from his perspective of how he felt like he was perceived was really interesting. It was a really, really awkward first 30 minutes sitting there. I'm not going to lie to you. He was like, why is this girl here? I think his wife got a little misunderstanding. He thought it was an on-camera interview. She was dressed beautifully. I was like, you look stunning, Yana, but I've got nothing for you. But like an hour in, Tarasenko then was like telling me about his basement, and he says, oh, like, I just got it redone. And I said, is it a man cave? He's like, no. And he goes and takes me downstairs, and he shows me that it's this little rink that he can play with his adopted son and also his other young son. And then he's really obsessed with his family. He says, you need to see my boys' rooms. I just renovated them. And he's just giving me this tour of his house. And he's so proud, just talking about his family, the roots he built there. He was talking about how he's learned how to cook, and he makes all these pastas with truffles, and was showing me pictures on his phone. And it was just a really humanizing moment. So that was one of my first exposures really to hockey players or doing these type of stories, and it always sticks out to me.
Each sport has its different cultures, and that will extend right into the way that they treat the media, that they treat women. You covered the NFL for a while. How does, from covering different sports, how accepting is hockey to female journalists? You talked about the group that you were with. Are we doing a good job in hockey?
Great question. We are and we aren't. When I first started covering hockey, everyone said it's the best people. It's the most down-to-earth people. And I find that to be true. And I'm really grateful for women like Helene Elliott or Lisa Dillman, who came before me, and they blazed the trail. And them being in the locker rooms all the time, it's so normal now for players to see a woman in the locker room that they don't treat me any different. When I say that it's a mixed bag, though, I was actually just reading a report this morning. I get one of these like sports newsletters, and it was talking about women in leadership positions at all different sports, and hockey ranked last. There's just, for whatever reason, not been women welcomed into non-traditional positions for women. And that's something that I see changing. And this year it felt like there was more and more women getting opportunities, but I'd love to see us just grow further in that area.
How about the Seattle Kraken and the sort of progressive, stance they've taken on that front in hiring some brilliant hockey minds?
Yeah, no, and I love what Seattle has done because they're so authentic to their community, and it's a diverse community. And they say, we know we're a hockey team, but it doesn't mean we have to have hockey people, or people that just came through hockey. If we take people from this industry or that industry or this background, we can take the best, thought processes and best practices from them and create something really cool. And I think more and more teams need to think like that. That said, I think sometimes we romanticize the Seattle Kraken because they're doing that in a lot of areas, but look at their hockey ops department. It's the same old hockey guys that we've seen get other jobs. It's Ron Francis and a bunch of his friends running the show so far.
One of our viewers here, Lynn Reimer, asks, how do the fans treat you as a female reporter? She feels that can be a different kettle of fish. And I'm going to couch this by saying when we were together at the hotel in Edmonton, the guy behind the desk recognized you and was just absolutely starstruck, and I thought treated you really good. But I'm sure, every good story maybe has a bad story. How have you felt accepted by the fans in the sport of hockey?
It's funny you say that because that was very unique and special to me. Not everyone recognizes me on the street. You just witnessed like my most star moment.
You handled it like it happened all the time.
It's funny. So like I said, and especially in the last year, I just don't see people, run into people. So I haven't had those interactions. I'd say online, mostly it's been most supportive. And I've been so grateful that there does seem to be people that have followed my career or comment on, stories again and again and are really supportive in that way. But also online, the veil of privacy and anonymity, and you don't know who's behind there. And some people can say some really mean things, and some things that I know if they saw me in person wouldn't feel comfortable saying to my face. And early on in my career, that definitely affected me more. My voice, that was another thing. I was told I had vocal fry, which is something that's very common to millennial women. I'm a millennial woman. I have vocal fry apparently. And I felt like this guy, I don't even know. I had to read up on it. But this guy, every time I tweeted something, would tweet at me with a frog emoji. frog emoji for like a year. And finally I decided to stand up to him, and I, had this whole response, and I think you're just inherently sexist because you don't like my voice. And then he just sent me another frog emoji, and you realize at that point that there's some battles you're just not going to win. And you have to, trust people in your inner circle and trust people who you trust, but don't always listen to some people who are anonymous.
Yeah, no doubt about that. Emily, one of the things too, you're always looking for fresh voices. I mean, I'm curious for your take on the challenges of the pandemic when it comes to the storytelling, the art of storytelling. I mean, obviously we don't have the same access that we're used to having, not being in the room, but I know you're always looking for fresh voices. But how would you describe that part of the job during the last year, and how you've been able to still come up with some, brilliant stories that we'll get into a little bit further right after this?
Yeah, it's a great question. I've been on the hockey beat for 4 years now, and throughout the pandemic, I've learned what a network I've built in those 4 years, because now we don't get the luxury of running into people in the locker room or at the arena and just having those like casual conversations. I'm relying on the people I already have in my phone to text and call me back. I realized if I was on this job for 20 or 25 years, the pandemic would have been a lot easier because I would have had such a bigger network, or, just more well-known and had those relationships that were a little more ingrained. So it's been tough in that sense, because I do get a lot of my best stories from just going up to guys in the locker room and having that, more informal conversation rather than setting up an interview time, calling them at that time and not having the face-to-face interaction, which I really value. So it's been a challenge, but it's not like I'm alone in this. I think it's probably been a challenge for both of you. It's been a challenge for everyone in society, and we're all just kind of finding ways to adapt.
I want to bring up around the horn, and we'll get more into that later. But one of the things I noticed is one of your many victories that you're racking up there, you had tackled the women's hockey league, and the feeling that there's not, or you need a better and more sustainable league than what we have right now. You talk about this issue so much. How invested are you, and how much do you feel you need to use your role that you have and your voice to create more space for women in hockey?
It's such a great question, because I came up through journalism in a very traditional role. Like my first bylines or they weren't even bylines, they were with the Associated Press, which is just like to the fact news. And I've been really grateful that through my platforms and through my jobs, I've been given the opportunity to express my opinion a little more. And you have to pick and choose your spots, because I still do cover news, and that's not a place to go cover it in. But women's hockey is one of those things, because it's not my primary beat, but I do cover it in the sense that I'm trying to, do a better job of covering these athletes, and not just for, oh, let's talk about the inequity. Oh, let's talk about how bad it is. Like, let's just talk about them like athletes, like the way we talk about the men athletes. Like, let's talk about their training. Let's talk about their interests off the ice. Let's talk about the rivalries. So yeah, and Around the Horn is one of those areas, though, that I am given the opportunity to use my opinion. And if you win, you can talk about anything you want. And it's such a privilege. And that day or that week, I just felt, this is the time to say this. It just felt right. We were talking so much about growth in the WNBA and women's soccer, and it just felt like I didn't want people to forget about women's hockey. And that show's great too, because it's not always hockey fans that watch it. In fact, it's probably majority not. So I can speak to new audiences in that way.
One of the great stories recently, Emily, we've discussed, privately too. You were able to shine such an important light on the mental health aspect of this season. What was your biggest takeaway from the people that you talked to for that extensive story?
And I think Sean could speak to this too, and you too, Ken, because you cover the league. But anyone who was in the bubble last year, it was a really big emotional toll on them, especially the guys that had to stay for the long haul, of just being holed in that hotel and the rink, making all the sacrifices, being so far apart from their families. And just COVID in general is just really, it's creating an anxiety in all of us. And I think if you don't see that, then, maybe it's good for you, but maybe you're not looking inward. And, I know that the bubble was one thing, but this season is another. And again, players are making sacrifices. Some are separated from their families. It's really isolating. And, just having a couple conversations throughout the year with players, I could tell it was something they felt, and it was real for them. But as you guys both know, hockey players sometimes have hard times talking about things that aren't exactly on the ice, because They never want to draw attention to themselves. They never want to seem bigger than the team. They never want to be a distraction. So that's why in that story, I did talk to a couple guys anonymously just because they felt more comfortable doing that.
In reading that story, I mean, it seems like everything's tough on everyone, but the quarantine aspect of it, I was thinking about Pierre-Luc Dubois when he got traded to Winnipeg, and we just think, okay, he goes and he has a little bit of a break for a while, and then he's talked time and time again about how tough it is to get out of that. And you touched on that in your story. You went through, it's funny, you're saying, because we were both in the bubble together, that it's a similar experience, but you went through that quarantine period when you came over the border, which is like a massive step above anything that I was forced to endure. And I'm wondering if that experience kind of helped put you more in touch with the players when you were telling this story.
Totally, because it was a shared experience. Yeah, I did 14 days in a Edmonton suburb Airbnb. If anyone needs tips, I figured it out. And like the things that I was learning along the way, you know, these are where you should order gross, like you think of ordering food at first and then you're sick of takeout. You're like, I want actual, like, I want to know what I'm putting in my body. I want to cook myself. And so it's funny, and it's a Winnipeg connection, but Cole Perfetti, who's obviously a Winnipeg draft pick, I did a story on him because I saw that quote where he said he spent, it was a ridiculous amount of days in 3 months in quarantine of playing in the World Juniors and getting to Manitoba and whatever it was. And so I talked to him, and listening to his experiences, I went through the same things where he's just like, I can't eat another hotel meal. Like, I'm just craving to cook for myself. Or, you know, you're actually surprised by how fast the days can go by just like cleaning and sitting around. And then you realize that you're kind of in a time warp because nothing's really happened. So, I think that was a shared experience.
No doubt. You've been very in tune with what's been happening with the Vancouver Canucks, Emily. What's kind of the latest there? And are they maybe past the worst of it at this point? Or how would you describe that?
I think they're past the worst of it, but it's this virus. We don't know, right? And, you know, we say the worst of it symptomatically because there were a lot of guys that were feeling it last weekend. You know, chills, dehydration, at least one guy who needed an IV. So I've heard that there's a lot of players whose symptoms are improving. I think the challenge now for the league, they're going to try to get them on the ice, you know, by the end of next week. But it's a different threshold for all of these guys to clear. If you're symptomatic, you have to, you know, 2 negative tests, X amount of days non-symptomatic. You also have to get it cleared by a cardiologist and a team doctor. And as we know about this virus, like even if you produce a negative test and you're technically over the virus, it still can live with you, or its effects can live with you. And maybe, you know, respiratorily or your conditioning is not as great. So we'll see how it goes for them. I just have a lot of empathy because this isn't easy. They're not in the playoff race. It kind of sucks right now to be off the ice and sick, knowing the challenge it's going to be to get back on the ice and just knowing how much it sucks not to play right now.
I want to get back to Around the Horn. I was doing some digging and looking into the stats. I don't know if these numbers are there anymore, but you are
crazy numbers. It's hilarious to me.
You are above a 30% winning percentage on that show. And I looked at the list of everyone who's been on the show. That is a massively high number. One, how proud are you of that? And two, what makes a good contestant on Around the Horn?
So I'm proud of it, but I've also had far less appearances than someone like Woody Page. So I'm sure in like a year or two, the law of averages will say it evens out. But that show has been awesome. I was so intimidated to do it for the first time because it was so much out of my comfort zone. It's a show that's been on the air in that same time slot for decades now. Like people grew up on that show and have an expectation of what that show is for them. And I didn't want to mess it up, but I think the reason it's such a good winning percentage is I treat every show like my freaking Super Bowl. Like I watch NBA games, which is torture for me being a hockey fan. You know, I'm reading all these stat blogs and podcasts, and I report on it. I call people, and people like Ramona, I'm like, what sounds smart is, you know, what are you hearing? Because we don't talk about hockey very often, and that's what I know best. So maybe things next year change with the rights deal, but I've had to prepare a lot.
How about a quick one too? What do you think that means for the company, having hockey back at home on ESPN?
It's great. I'm selfish. It's great for me and my company, but I also just think it's great for the sport itself. I mean, ESPN is ubiquitous with sports in America. You know, we see the way we treat our other rights holders like the NFL and NBA, And I just think to grow the game of hockey, which I think inherently is every hockey person's goal, being on ESPN will just open a lot of avenues.
Emily, it means so much to us that you joined us. Very revealing, very great. And I got to say, all the amazing stuff you told us, the fact that your mom was in a Bruce Springsteen video, I think we drew out something that a lot of people didn't know. That's
you know what? I'm gonna have
awesome
to fact check her and like find out exactly which video it was, what she was doing. But Maxwell's was the spot in Hoboken.
Okay. Well, hey, if you can narrow it down and find it and maybe tweet it, I'm sure everyone would love to see it.
I'm sure.
I got to check that out.
I appreciate both of you. I appreciate having me on.
Great to see you,
Emily.
Have a great weekend.
Much. We'd love to have you on in the future. It's always a pleasure talking with you. Thank you so much for joining us.
My pleasure.
All right. From one awesome female journalist to another awesome female broadcaster and phenomenal hockey player, Cassie Campbell-Pascall, we bring her into the show. How are you doing, Cassie?
I'm good, Sean. Ken, how are you guys?
We're awesome. Thank you for joining us.
You know, other than my teammates, Jennifer Botterill, Sammy Jo Small, you two might be my most favorite people from. And I probably should put Scott Oak in there too.
Yeah, careful. It's like an Oscar speech. You don't want to leave anybody out. We love doing origin stories on here, and I like the whole superhero angle of the origin story because to me, you are exactly that. You are a Canadian superhero. I always talk about the time that you were here in 2018 covering that Jets playoff run. And my two young daughters were so proud when I told them that I was out working and doing hits with someone who is as accomplished as you, world champion, Olympic champion. Where does it all start? How does Cassie Campbell get involved in hockey?
Well, I had an older brother, right? And, you know, he used to make sure I always wasn't picked last when we played street hockey. And, you know, I kind of wanted to be just like him. And my parents, of course, you know, back in the day, a long time ago, because I'm getting pretty old, you know, they put you in figure skating as a girl. And so that's what I did my first year. And my brother actually had a girl on his team named Jennifer Minkus, and she was an amazing player. And I actually started playing hockey in the U.S., if you can believe that. My dad was transferred there from work. And she was my last argument. Mom, Dad, like Jennifer plays and she's amazing. Why can't I play? And of course, it was just boys hockey you could play at that time. And so that's what I did. And yeah, it's just, I never knew I could play for Team Canada growing up. I just loved the game, you know, and I just wanted to play sports and be active. And lo and behold, you know, sort of 16, 17, I kind of found out that we could play for Canada, and that immediately became my goal. And, you know, I always thought I'd go to the Olympics in a completely different sport. You know, I had no idea women's hockey would ever be entered into the Olympics. So, you know, it's been an amazing ride, you guys. And then to join Hockey Night in Canada almost 15 years ago now, that's, you know, and learning on the fly and getting thrown into different roles and different things over the years, it's been a lot of fun.
Winnipegger Jennifer Botterill, someone you mentioned, told us a great story about, you know, her conversation with her parents, the why not you. Do you remember what that conversation was like for you when that Olympic dream became kind of something that was on your radar?
You know, my mom coached me growing up. So, you know, I think as soon as that, you know, the Canada Games, I was able to participate in that first Canada Games, which was in 1991. And that was sort of like, okay. And then, you know, I think the Olympics was announced right after that for 98. And, you know, that it just wasn't even really a conversation. It was just, okay, this is what you're going to do. And, you know, both my parents were really athletic and into sports. And so that was sort of the path. I think they were always, you know, whatever path I was going to take, I know they were going to be supportive. But, you know, once the Olympics were announced, I think it was just sort of a given that that's where I wanted to go and try. And, you know, people don't know this, but I was actually cut as a 16-year-old and an 18-year-old trying out for Team Canada. Didn't even make it out of the list of Ontario. So, you know, it wasn't just like I just walked on and this is how it worked. And so it's just been amazing. It's been so much fun. And now I'm back. It's kind of full circle. I've been back part-time for the last 2 years with our national women's team and, you know, working under my former teammate, Gina Kingsbury. It's so much fun to be back and, you know, be part of that Hockey Canada jersey again and part of that Hockey Canada culture. And again, it's been a lot of fun.
I want to jump back to that in just a bit, but you getting cut at 16 and 18. I think it's important to hear the stories from people who end up having phenomenal careers like yours. How did you bounce back? What mindset did you take from that and stop that from being the end of the road and use it for fuel?
Well, when I was 16, I was captain of Team Ontario, right? So, and back in the day, you didn't see any of your role models on TV. Like, I didn't even know women that were older than me played the game. So then all of a sudden I show up to Team Canada camp and there's all these amazing players. And I'm like, where did these guys come from? And, but at the same time, I believed I was great, and I guess that's part of the reason why I was a good athlete. But at the same time, I think it was really humbling. And I truly believe that if I didn't have those experiences being cut twice, not just once, but twice, that I probably wouldn't have been the leader that I was. I think I learned through those experiences that, you might be really good in your community, you might be really good in your province, but there's a whole other big country around and there's so many other great players. And I think that allowed me to kind of be humbled a little bit and allowed me to understand how important it is to play a role. And I think confidence, it hurt your confidence for sure as a young kid, but I think it also helped me build it too. It also helped me learn that when things don't go your way, how do you rebuild yourself? How do you rebuild a dream and belief? And how do you face adversity? And, I think those were really good learning experiences for me.
You touched on the leadership aspect, Cassie. You always were known as a great leader. What in your mind makes a great leader, and how did you become one?
Well, Ken, I think you're always learning. I think that's what great leaders do. And who's kidding who? I was the captain of a team full of unbelievable people and leaders. And so it was really kind of an easy job. And my job was made so much easier by the fact that all the other women on my team were captains or assistants of their club teams. So, I think leaders are always leading. I think leaders are versatile. They're trying to make other people around them better. That's their number one priority. Obviously, you have to perform and you have to do all those things, but you're also trying to pick people up and try to learn about people so that you can figure out what buttons to push to make them play their best or be their best and perform at their best. But I think for me, it starts with being humble. It starts with being real. It starts with being who you are and being willing to be versatile and do whatever it takes to help the team win.
You really were part of a changing time when you came into hockey, and that how you were saying that you didn't have role models to look to when you were, not that they weren't there, but they weren't as visible back at that time, and that you didn't know that there were older women playing hockey like that. You've always struck me from the times I've had the pleasure of working with you as being someone who takes your role as a role model very seriously. How do you approach that?
It's funny. I feel like I've had a little bit of that pressure taken off me because, now we're seeing Jennifer Botterill on Hockey Night in Canada, Sarah Nurse and Natalie Spooner. And more people are starting to know the other players, the other great women. And so I knew early on, sort of with my time on Hockey Night in Canada, and probably even right up to 4 or 5 years ago, I knew that I was representing the female game. It wasn't just about being Cassie on Hockey Night in Canada. Like, if I make a mistake, it reflects on women's hockey and, they don't know, they don't really play at a high level, all those types of things that kind of get questioned. But I do feel that it was something that I had to do, wanted to do. I also took it, Sean, where I just had to be myself. Sometimes the demands were a little bit hectic at times throughout my career. And even working with Hockey Night in Canada, you become sort of a spokesperson for women in hockey and broadcasting, which is something I never wanted to do. I just wanted to be a broadcaster and talk hockey just like you guys. So that part of it was sometimes frustrating that you kind of had to be that voice. But at the same time, I knew the importance of it. I knew the value of it. And I'm just so glad that the pressure's kind of off now, that there's more and more of my former teammates that are involved. And I think this current team, more players on this current team than we ever knew throughout my generation. You maybe knew one or two of us. And, I think now, little girls are getting to see their role models a lot more. And so, there's more opportunities for more of the female players, which for me it's been awesome to watch.
I mean, what is that like to see Marie-Philippe Poulin in a Gatorade commercial? I mean, that's something, again, that you probably wouldn't have seen a whole lot when you were wanting to become the next great female player.
It's amazing, just the opportunities corporate wise. And, I have to tell you, Ken, I was actually in a Gatorade commercial with George St. Pierre, but it was post my career. It was the year after I retired and I had started with Hockey Night in Canada. So my brand, if you will, escalated because of Hockey Night in Canada, not necessarily because of what I'd already done as a hockey player.
Mm-hmm.
To see, to see those commercials and to see the Barbie dolls with Tim Hortons, with Sarah Nurse and Mary Philippe Glenn. And I work for McDonald's, so I probably shouldn't mention those, but who cares? It's neat. Like, it's just, that's what you kind of hope for and you build for, and you hope that, I'm a very little piece of the puzzle, but you just hope it escalates and the opportunities get better and better for the next generations. And so I always reach out to them when they're in commercials, and I make fun of them. Like I said to Mary Philippe Glenn, that's all you got for chin-ups? Like, put more weight. We put more weight. And I always kind of bug them too, but I'm so proud of all of them, and getting a chance to know them after the last couple of years. They deserve every opportunity they get.
I like hearing how getting involved with Hockey Night in Canada helped you extend and build that brand and give you some of the recognition from your career that you probably deserved at the time, but getting it later. Was broadcasting always in the cards for you, or how did you end up going down that road?
Sean, when I finished university, I became sort of a professional hockey player for the first time, right? There was sort of nothing else in my life just other than the Olympic stuff. And for women, it's the same probably for men too, but when you realize that you're not going to go on and make millions and millions of dollars, you know that you're going to have to get a job at some point. My life, though, became kind of boring. Just being a hockey player, I was like, I kind of felt that I didn't have that balance. And so I dabbled in broadcasting as much as I could. Just, I do the morning show here in Calgary where I trained and live now. And I just, before going to training, I just show up at, 5 a.m. and I would, fill in for the morning show host, and I would dabble in it. And I, did the NHL Network, which was one of the, way back in 2002, we finished the Olympics, and then all of a sudden I'm like, okay, what am I going to do now? So I dabbled there, and I always kind of dabbled throughout my career, but I honestly, when I retired, I had no idea what I was going to do. Like, I was just like, okay, now what? And then, Joel Darling connected with me, and I did an audition for Hockey Night, and grew up in a way in media that you probably shouldn't, being on the biggest show and you have no idea what you're doing. But it's been such a great ride, and I feel like I've been accepted within my peers and my colleagues and all the players. They kind of know my career, and so I kind of feel like I was accepted right from the get-go. But at the same time, it came with a lot of pressure, right? Sort of being that first female player to have a full-time role with Hockey Night. And everyone was so great to me, and from the CBC people to now Sportsnet, it's been good.
Can you give us a peek behind the curtain too, Cassie, about what that was like? The centralizing element for being an Olympian. I mean, I just don't think that the common person maybe understands what that experience is like and how locked in those athletes have to be.
Yeah, I think one thing that people don't know a lot about women's hockey, because our leagues aren't necessarily, they're not on, television all the time. People don't know about it. But back when I played, our league was really well established. And, if you were playing on the national team and you were playing club hockey, you probably played 60 to 65 games a year. And, plus you were training full time, and it really was just like the guys, except no one knew where we were, what we were doing, or who we were playing against. And mom and dad and grandpa and grandma would be in the stands and a few friends, but it really was such a big commitment. And now it's just the same. I know it's kind of confusing with the PWHPA, and exactly, the girls don't really have a league at this time that they feel is viable enough to play in, but these girls are training full time. Our fitness results for Team Canada, through this whole COVID period, when you think about the athletes being off and not having anywhere to play and not being able to train like they normally would, the fitness results were the highest they've ever been. Like, the commitment level by these women is tremendous, and it is full time. And I think that's one thing people don't understand, is that, they're trying to play games through this situation as much as they can. And they're on the ice every day. At one point they were on the ice, just 2 people on the ice were allowed, but they're on there. They're just trying to, like the guys, they're just trying to get themselves better every single day the way that they can. And they train full time, and it's really a full-time commitment. And, hopefully this PWHPA leads to what I see as a real viable future for women's hockey in a WNHL. And I really think we're closer than we've ever been.
Our last guest, Emily Kaplan, has used her platform to bring, credence to the idea of having, like you said, a viable women's hockey league. You've been a builder in the sport for years. You say that we're close. We're closer than we've ever been. What's it going to take to get there? What do we need to do as the hockey community to push this uphill and get it there?
Well, first I want to say something about Emily, just the fact that she's been one of the very few that's covered women's hockey a lot. And she's one of the very few that does a great job at it too. And she, really gets to the nuts and bolts of the stories, which I don't think a good job has been done telling the story of the PWHPA and why the top players are fighting for what they're fighting for. And she's one of the ones that's really dug deep and done her research and really been a journalist through this whole thing. So thanks so much to Emily. But, I think it's a continued conversation behind the scenes. I think there's a lot going on that people don't know about. There's a lot going on that maybe at this point people shouldn't know about, just because it is kind of so up in the air with COVID and everything. And I think the NHL is trying to get their ducks in order. As we all know, it's forever changing. And, COVID hit the economy of the NHL and the economy of this world in a hard way. So, I think that kind of set women's hockey back a little bit. Obviously, there's bigger issues with COVID than women's hockey, but, I just think it's close. And I think we're definitely on the right track. But I think we do need people like yourselves to keep talking about it. Like, why isn't it happening? And, when we get a chance to speak with Gary Bettman and to speak with Bill Daly, and that should be one of the questions, like what's going on with women's hockey? I mean, that's just where we're at right now. And I just happen to know that they believe in our sport. I happen to know that eventually they want a professional league. I think that's important for them, much like the WNBA. I mean, it just totally makes sense. And I know that we have their support, and I think that's important. But we do need to keep asking the questions, like, why is it taking it so long? And I think right now just COVID has really set us back.
Just a quick one. Sorry to rewind, but Emily told a great story about the influence that Ramona Shelburne had on her career, Cassie. I'm wondering, who were some of the people that you had as sounding boards and some of the people that you really maybe respected on the journalist side as you tried to improve and get better, just like you did as a player?
Well, I think, like as a player, it was my teammates. I remember Ron McLean reaching out to me early and, Cass, just be yourself, because people will see right through it if you're not. And Kelly Rudy, who has 3 daughters, and I didn't know that at the time, but, I worked a lot with him out west, and he did a segment behind the mask. And I remember one time he kind of rookie initiated me. He dropped the truck and he pretended he was fighting with the producers about his show, and it kind of escalated in the truck, and I'm sitting there and then they all laughed and kind of made a joke of it. But, he was someone that he would connect and text and call and how are things going? What do you need? And so many great producers, Jim Huff and Shirley Najak and Brian Spear. And, Rick Briggs Jude is a name that you guys would know. And, he was back and he's helped start the NHL Network. He was always a big supporter of me and someone I could talk to. And, but I didn't really, I'll be honest with you, Brenda Irving was really one of the only females that I knew or got to see. Colleen Jones, someone I got to see in sports journalism. So those are 2 names that kind of stick out for me. But as from a female perspective, I never really got a chance to be around other female people that had been on Hockey Night in Canada. So it was mostly men that kind of helped me along the way. And Joel Darling was one of those people. But it was mostly my colleagues within Hockey Night in Canada that I could chat with. I watched Scott Oak and I'd watch how he do his interviews. I'd watch Elliot Friedman and I'd watch how he do his stuff. And I try to put my own twist on it. And but those are just some of the names of the many, many people, as you guys know, that help you along the way.
Yeah, we had Harn Ryan sing on 2 weekends ago, and he brought up Kelly Rudy, who had basically found him, and Joel Darling. I mean, the effect that he's had on this industry behind the scenes, the people that he's found and the support that he's given, really lucky to know those people. We are. I want to go back. As we're trying to build hockey, I find this a really interesting angle because the rivalry that exists between Canada's hockey program and the U.S. women's hockey program is fierce, and I love it. I think it's one of the take everything else away in sport. The women's hockey in Canada and U.S., that rivalry is hot, and I wonder what it's like trying to work with women from both sides of the border to try and create this sustainable hockey league with people who you have gone to war with and players who are playing now are going to war with, but trying to come together and make this work for everyone involved. That's got to be a tricky, somewhat fun, somewhat explosive dynamic at times.
Well, and I think that's also the power of the PWHPA, that you have international players, US, Canada players working together for a common goal. And that just shows you the strength and the power of what they believe in. And, you know, they've drawn a real hard line in the sand together, which has made the PWHPA, in my opinion, it's going to be the organization that when we look back 100 years from now, that made the hugest difference, you know. And there's so many people and so many other leagues that have, you know, had their impact. But I truly believe with all these girls and women from different countries coming together, it's been a pretty powerful thing. And, you know, the US-Canada rivalry, it's still there. It's still vicious. It still exists. But they know each other because they go to NCAA colleges together. And a lot of them train together in the off season. Where back in my day, we didn't know each other and we didn't like each other at all. And I'll catch up with AJ Malesko, who works for NBC in the US. And, you know, we'll be doing the same game in the playoffs. You know, the Nashville Winnipeg series back, we'd go for a beer after and we just laugh and we kind of tell each other how much we didn't like each other, you know. We go back and we reminisce about those stories and then you get to know them. And, you know, obviously I have so much respect for Cammy Granado and Angela Ruggiero, and I, like, we battled every shift on the ice. You know, my job was to get her away from Wick and Goyette, and so it was vicious but you learn to like them because you get to know them and you learn to understand that we've all kind of had the same path to help build the game. But the rivalry is just as fierce. You know, the US has had our number for a long time, which is part of the reason why I wanted to go back and help the program in a very minor way. But they're really good. You know, that it really started after Winnipeg Worlds in 2007. Their 2008 team just kind of took their program to a whole other level. And yeah, it's just as vicious as it is now. But I think, you know, going back to your original question, just the power of these women coming together from all different countries for one goal is, you know, makes me proud as an alumni and as an older player to watch this group, you know, stick together and fight for what they believe is right.
One of the, you know, coolest sporting moments that I've been able to witness live, I was at the 2010 Olympics with my dad in the crowd for the Canada-USA women's game. And then to see someone that I knew, Jennifer Botterill, have such an important impact in the game was so neat to see that personal connection. What do you think it meant for the sport to see that happen on Canadian soil at an Olympic event, and to see the way that the community in Vancouver rallied, but across the nation, and what that meant for the growth of the sport? You know, again, now it's 11 years later, but can you quantify the impact that moment had?
Well, it was tremendous what they did under that pressure. You know, the U.S., you know, had really started to come on, and, you know, they'd won previous world championships, and they, you know, that 2008 team for them with the Hillary Knights and the Kelly Stacks and, you know, all this group that was starting to come in. And just to do what Team Canada did under that pressure, and to think about, you know, going back to Jennifer Botterill, she was on the fourth line with Marie-Philippe Poulin, you know, and I'm trying to think who I think it was Gina Kingsbury might have been, or Megan Augusta, I can't remember now, but, and for them to produce like they did, the 2 goals, and, you know, for Jennifer Botterill in particular, that's not a role she was ever used to playing, and she had to play it for the first time, and she did an amazing job, you know, and that's what happens to all of us as our careers start to dwindle down, is you better be able to be flexible and play different roles, and she assisted on the game-winning goal, and, you know, that was really the coming out party, if you will, of Marie-Philippe Poulin. You know, she's 18 years old. You know, we've never had a player in our program that has scored the big goals like she has on the Olympic stage in gold medal games. And, you know, to me, arguably the best player that's ever played for Canada. And to see her on that stage kind of come in under the radar and do what she did it was amazing. And I was there as a broadcaster. That was my first one broadcasting. And I remember after the game, we're doing our hits and all these things. And all the players are down on the ice, and, you know, just being so proud of them, knowing the pressure that they were under, and watching some of my former teammates and, of course, friends, you know, pull it off and win again under that. It was a lot of fun to be there, to be, you know, just there, not even a part of it at all, but to be there and to kind of witness it was really special for sure.
Cassie, never mind women's hockey, never mind hockey. in most of sport, there are very few athletes who are as decorated as you are with the accomplishments that you've had. This is maybe like asking a parent to pick their favorite child, but do you have a medal that is your favorite, the one that kind of stands out above all else, or maybe the moment for you that you look back on as being your greatest accomplishment?
Well, Sean, like, it's never my greatest accomplishment because you do it with a team. I know you know that, but I look back now and I look at 98 and I look at the fact that we lost, and the 11 or 12 of us who went on to, eventually win 4 years later in Salt Lake City. And we beat the American Dream Team. We had no business winning that gold medal game. They beat us 8 times in a row. They were centralized for 4 years. They were by far the better team. That really sticks out to me as sort of an international, that Salt Lake, under the adversity that we faced and everything. But the silver was what helped us get there. The silver is where I probably learned the most about myself as an athlete, as a person, as a leader. And I also got to go back to 1995. This is a long time ago. I played for the University of Guelph. I was the only national team player that played there. We played against University of Toronto in the final, and they had about 7 or 8 national team players, and we won. And Sean, those are the groups that you play with every day. The teammates that you went to school with, you're going to class with, you're training with, and to win that championship with that amazing group of women. None of them, you won't know their names just simply because they never played on the national team. But we had a reunion, and everyone except 2 people were able to be there, unable to be there. And it was just such a special group, and a group that, in university, when you're growing up and you're making all these decisions about life, that you become so close knit with. So those 3 experiences for me, the 95 win in university, the silver medal is really important to me. And in a weird way, because, our expectation is gold or don't come home in this country. But then the Salt Lake, right? That whole 4-year process of learning from the silver to gold was probably the 4 best years of my career and my self-education, if you will, because I learned a lot about myself. And to win in Salt Lake, where we had no business, was just those feelings. It was just something I'll never forget, for sure.
Because of the leadership role you were able to play, Cassie, I'm curious for your thoughts on what this time is like for the Winnipeg Jets. When you have a guy like Blake Wheeler, who's been in the lineup, in that security blanket for so long, missing just the one game, and in a forced rest situation since 2015-16, what's it like for the group when the leader is not there? And also, what's it like for Blake Wheeler to have to dealing with a concussion at this time of year, knowing how much he wants to be in the lineup?
Well, the second part of your question, just with concussions, it's scary because you can all of a sudden feel great and then all of a sudden feel really bad in the same day. And they're really scary because you just don't know how long you're going to be out. It's frustrating because you do have those moments of feeling, okay, I'm back, I'm ready. And then you go try and ride the bike and you're like, oh boy, I'm not. So for him, I just hope that it's nothing long term. I love the way the Winnipeg Jets are dealing with it, though, because I do think in the NHL in particular, concussions still aren't dealt with the way they should be. So I'm a real advocate of what the Winnipeg Jets are doing, keeping him home and treating this as if it's a concussion, even before it was completely diagnosed, I'm sure, because I think that's the way they should be handled. Listen, we just had a reunion for the 2001 World Championships, and we were missing Haley Wickenheiser that year, and she was arguably one of our better players, and we ended up winning the tournament. When you lose a player like a Blake Wheeler, like a Wickenheiser, honestly, your mindset in the room is, okay, who's going to step up? Who's that next person up? And it's a big loss, but you also know they're just one person. And, there's so many other great players, and in particular with the Jets, their forwards they have such a deep group of forwards. That third line, obviously Kopp moves up, but, those 3 guys can do a lot of different things. They're pretty versatile. And even their fourth line, like Matthew Perreault, is a pretty versatile player. He could probably play on any line if you needed him to. So, that's the mindset of an athlete, is one person down, who steps up. And that's, yes, they're going to say all the right things in the media, like, yes, we're going to miss Blake Wheeler, and they're going to for different things. But that's the mentality of each athlete, is, okay, great, I get more opportunity here. And here I am, I'm going to step up, and I'm going to prove that I deserve this opportunity. And who knows where it's going to take me down the road, and let's just continue to help our team win.
Cassie, you mentioned that Jets third line. In a pre-COVID world, the last game I had the pleasure of doing with you, we were in Chicago. And it was the mom's trip, and we got to do an interview with Adam Lowry's mom, who I found out from you you're very good friends with. Take us through that friendship, and take us through the idea that Adam's dad, Dave, was an NHL player, and I think people just want to assume that that's where the athleticism comes from. That's where the drive comes from. Take us through, what you know of his mom and how she's affected his life, because I talked to him about it afterwards, after I had this conversation with you, and he was like, bang on, my mom was a driver. But your relationship with her.
She was a beast. Like, you guys, you have no idea how fit she is and how amazing she is, and marathons that she's run. And I think she's qualified, and I know I say 28 Boston marathons she's qualified for, and I don't think she's done them all because of kids and being a mom and all those things, but she's an absolute beast. And we trained together in a running group. I had no business, you guys, being in this running group, but I decided as a former hockey player, and I'm actually a decent runner for a former hockey player because we're usually not that good at running, and I joined this group of, like, I don't know what I was thinking. They're all triathletes, marathon runners. Okay, well, that's kind of my mindset. And I honestly had just no business being there, but I got to be a better runner through that. And, just got to know her a lot through that as well. And obviously in the community with Dave, and they live here in Calgary where I live, you bump into each other. But Elaine and I just kind of became good friends, and someone that I could talk to, and, she'd give me great advice. And I did a join the movement at the start of COVID, where I would take people on my Peloton and we would do rides, and we went through the National Women's Program, and Shea Weber was on it, and so many other NHLers, and the National Women's Team, and Elaine and Dave came on, and they were amazing, because I could see Dave on his bike, just like, oh boy, what am I getting myself into? And then she's just there, like, singing like it's no big thing. Adam Lowry, that's all I will tell you. Dave gets all the accolades, of course, because he played in NHL, great captain, all those things. And he's coaching there now, obviously. But Elaine runs the show, and Elaine is actually the biggest beast of that entire family. So glad you got to tell the story.
Yeah, good to shine a light on Elaine. I had a chance to talk to her on one of the trips to LA a couple of years ago. Just an absolutely great person, and as you mentioned, she'll lap the field when it comes to fitness for sure. Cassie, obviously Monday is an important day around the NHL and in our industry. What are your expectations for what we might see, and what do you think the Jets might be honing in on?
I'm hearing different things. Sometimes it depends on the day. I think I'm hearing that it's not going to be busy at all. And then I'm hearing, well, there's a couple things in the hopper from different people. And I'm a big believer, and I'm not just saying this because I'm on this show, and I said it when I was covering the Jets recently. I think Kevin Cheveldayoff has got the group here that I think he should be going for, and I think adding a defenseman, I think that's been well documented. I think up front, totally fine. I think they've got the depth, they've got those interchangeable parts. And of course, the Blake Wheeler situation is something they're going to probably obviously keep their eye on, because you just never know how long concussions can keep people out. But, I think they got to go for it on the back end. And, they've got a Vezina Trophy goaltender. They've got a defensive group that, I don't want to say overachieved, because I think that's a bit negative, but I think it's been way more solid than anyone anticipated it being. And I think they need to add a piece there. I think they need to add some physicality on the back end. And if I'm Kevin Cheveldayoff, I think I have a real chance to win the cup. I just think Winnipeg is such a deep team. And, the disappointment of what happened against Calgary last year in that pre-qualification round, if you will, and obviously the Mark Scheifele injury hurt them, but that's going to sting. That's going to be part of their motivation. And I just think they're ripe for doing some major damage in these playoffs.
I just want to go back. I loved how you talked about Adam's mom and her being the driver in that family. And I wanted to explore a little more the idea of, the mom is not getting the credit maybe that they deserve when it comes to athletes. Because, I read up a little bit, and your mom was an athlete and had a massive effect on your career and your life.
My mom, she played a lot of sports. She was an equestrian rider. She trained horses for the Royal, the one of the biggest equestrian shows in our country. And she played professional football in 1969 before she got pregnant with my brother. There was a women's league, and it was similar to sort of the CFL. And I've done I can't find a lot on it because I've done a little bit of research, but she does have a newspaper article, and, there is some proof to this that, she's done this. And I remember going to her softball games. She played softball, women's softball, and it was unusual, and there's your mom, and you're she was just, both my parents were such great role models, but I think my mom did things that women weren't supposed to do at that time. And, I learned a lot from her in that sense. And, she was very athletic, and so was my dad, and so was my brother. So it's just kind of fun to be part of that kind of family that is supportive in that sense.
It's been awesome to learn a lot of the personal insight on you, Cassie. Thank you so much for that. It's just been awesome. Just a quick thought from you. What are your impressions of the North Division? We knew what we kind of anticipated it being. What has it been for you, and who do you see, or how do you see things shaping up down the stretch run here?
Well, I think those top three teams right now, if you look at sort of Toronto, Winnipeg, and Edmonton, are kind of interchangeable as far as who's the better team. I think more so Toronto, Winnipeg. I think that debate has been going on sort of all year, who's the better team. And it's been really fun for me to watch the talent. Like obviously Connor McDavid is just ridiculous. And, what Austin Matthews has done. And I think his complete game is his all-time high for his career. And, you watch the depth of the Jets. And I just think up front they have the most depth. I think they have the best goaltender. So those three teams, now Montreal starting to add some pieces, and they had the loss obviously against the Jets last night, but I think that's another team that's got a lot of depth as well. And I still think Carey Price is a great goalie. I know he took a lot of criticism this year, but I still think he's top 5 in this league for sure. Calgary, the team I cover, and of course my husband works for the team as well. I think the sticking point for them was always like, well, they're not really a playoff team. And I think that's what they've struggled with this year, where it's been playoff like hockey all year, and they've kind of had that struggle. But it's been a mystery how all those top guys just can't score. And it was with Jeff Ward, they couldn't score. Now with Daryl Sutter, they can't score either. So it's a little bit of a mystery around here. And so disappointing what's happened to Vancouver. And, you just hope everyone's going to be safe long-term, right, in that situation. And I've loved watching Ottawa. And we all knew they were going to probably be at the basement, but they compete every single night, and there's no easy points against them. And so it's been a lot of fun to watch, but I'm not going to lie, you guys, I do miss the Crosbys, and I do miss the Ovechkins, and I do miss the Patrice Bergerons and the Steven Stamkos. I miss watching them on a regular basis and seeing them come through Canada. So I'm looking forward to when we get back to some kind of normalcy for sure.
Yeah, Cassie, it's been absolutely phenomenal to talk with you. I love hearing the stories about, the people that you looked up to in your broadcasting career, because I mean, a journalist like myself, I absolutely look up to you and learn from you. And I gotta say, I don't know, maybe I shouldn't share this story, but when we were in Chicago, that last game I was talking about, we all went out and had a beer after the game. And when we left, you left a little bit earlier than everyone else, and we went to go pay, and we couldn't pay because Cassie picked up the tab for the entire crew. Just, I think, says everyone knows that you're special and you're great, but it's just, it kind of never seems to end with you. Just one thing is better than the next. And it's been a pleasure working with you in the past, and we're so excited that you agreed to come on with us, and we sure hope to be able to talk with you in the future.
Well, anytime. And thanks for reaching out. And I know, Sean, that it wasn't just one beer. I know that for sure.
Well, because you had to pay for it.
Yeah, but what comes around goes around. I'm a big fan, and that was a lot of fun. And I enjoy covering the Jets. I enjoy when I get a chance to see you guys at morning skates and get a chance to work with you in the playoffs. So thanks for having me on. And I know I'm in my workout attire. I'm going to go on my Peloton right now and start my day off right. But this was a great way to start it. So thank you.
Yeah, I agree. Thank you so much, Cassie.
Awesome, Cassie.
Can't wait to talk to you in the future.
All right. Cheers, you guys.
Have a great
Cheers.
weekend.
Man, oh man, that's a great show. That was
tremendous.
Was a ton of fun.
We're just going to bring this up one more time here.
Philly Danger. Really nice to get to know Cassie tonight, all while sitting under a 32-degree starry night sky in Thailand. That's absolutely phenomenal. And you know what? We don't get as much into the viewer comments when we do these things, but a lot of people saying some really great stuff. And it makes us proud to see Lynn Reimer saying awesome guests and conversations today. Like usual, keep up the good work. And Nicole here, such inspiring female role model. Sure wish this had been a thing when I was a teen. Great guests, guys. And you know what? I think that's something that, Cassie had touched on it, and about the responsibility of people in hockey, not just of, the women covering the sport, but people like you and I and just all of us kind of pulling on the rope to make sure that women's hockey gets the recognition that it deserves. I mean, the funny thing I find is when you talk about someone like Cassie, growing up and watching her in the Olympics, I mean, it's not just women that they have an effect on. I take a look, and I mean that when I say the rivalry that exists between Canada and the U.S. in the women's hockey program, I think is one of the best rivalries in hockey of all time, because there's so much passion. They go at each other, and I just think they've been so great for the game of hockey. We've been so lucky to have that to witness, and it's something that we should be witnessing more of.
Yeah, absolutely. And again, when I said that, I mean, I mean this. Being at that gold medal game with my dad, I've been to some unreal sporting experiences. I've been to the World Series. I've been to the Stanley Cup final. Being at that gold medal game was absolutely awesome to see the atmosphere in the building and to see what it meant to the country afterward. I remember walking around town in Vancouver. I mean, people were so proud to see that kind of a moment on home soil and everything else. I mean, the women's game has grown exponentially, but there still are steps that need to be taken, and I look forward to those steps being taken. So again, being able to shine a light on, these people are our friends, yes, but they're also doing tremendous work in the industry, and I think it's fantastic to be able to have these kind of conversations where you get to know them as people and not just as journalists.
I agree, because they're great people. She touched quickly on the trade deadline. We'll have one last chance to talk trade deadline before we go into our trade deadline show on Monday. Anything that she said that kind of resonates with you? I thought it was interesting. She's hearing a lot of what I think everyone else is hearing, that sometimes it feels like the market is coming on and then doesn't quite take off. Is that where you're at?
Pretty much, had a few conversations the last couple of days. I think there are some teams that are kind of going to be in the middle of the action, but I do think, again, I think that it's a staring contest again right now. So, I mean, the Islanders, paid a price. Yes, they paid a first-round pick, but it was a reasonable price, I think. So, I think that there are a lot of GMs who want to add pieces, but it has to be at the right value proposition. I think the Jets are one of those teams in that grouping. I think that the Toronto Maple Leafs are in that grouping, and I also think that, as our colleague Eric Engels wrote last night, the Montreal Canadiens are in that grouping as well. I'm not anticipating the Edmonton Oilers doing much. Maybe they add a depth piece, but the Canadiens could be another. We've talked about David Savard a lot. Eric Engels mentioned, I mean, he looks like the kind of guy that could fit right in on the Canadiens' back end. Yes, they have depth, but they don't have as many right-handed shot players on that depth, and we know that third pairing was on the ice for that fourth line goal that the Jets got from Trevor Lewis. So I wouldn't be surprised if the Montreal Canadiens were one of those teams that makes a move for a defenseman as well. Obviously, the Gallagher injury hurts them in terms of their production, but it frees up a little bit of additional money that would allow them to bring on a contract like David Savard. So I think that they're in the mix for Savard. In terms of the Jets, I mean, we're both in agreement with Cassie. I mean, we think that the Jets they're definitely a contender in the North Division, and they would be even more of a contender if they add top four defensemen.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. And again, we've both said this before, we feel like it's going to happen. So thanks everyone for joining us. We really appreciate you making us a part of your Monday morning, or I guess the evening if we're talking to our group of people who watch us overseas, which makes me excited every time we see that. I love it when they check in. Keep an eye out for our pre-games and our post-games. And again, we're going to try and do something in this space on Monday when it comes to the trade deadline. Of course, we've got our work we have to do with Sportsnet, but we love having conversations with all you, and we love that you reach out to talk with us, and want to make ourselves available on that day because we're thinking there's going to be something to talk about. So once again, thank you so much for joining us. Hope you enjoyed the show.